Welcome back to another week's analysis behind the news. And over the next 4 weeks, not this one, but after this week, we will be doing an analysis of something that I think is very important. I watched Fox News over the weekend, and they had a program on there entitled Surrendering America. And they covered 4 subjects that I'm going to cover 1 week at a time, because I just felt that there was an awful lot in these particular subjects that were left out, which would necessitate to be put in there for people to understand these issues a lot better. Let me give you what they are. The administration's plan to surrender control of the internet is 1. 2, the proposal to reduce our army to the lowest level since World War II, before World War II. 3, the decision to abandon America's manned space program. And lastly, the administration's hesitance to fully exploit the nation's national energy resources to global strategic advantage. And as I said, I think that there were things that were left out of these reports that are necessary for the American people to understand them better. So we're going to do that one at a time over the next 4 weeks. One of the things that I saw this last week, which I found rather disturbing, was this particular article in the Financial Times. This was on Friday this last week. And the title of it is Germany Pushes Eurozone Fusion. Well, that title kind of caught my eye. If you fusion, Eurozone fusion, wow. Obviously, they're going to talk about building a more central government, and that's what this article is all about. It seems that the financial minister of Germany is now talking about a single financial minister for the European zone, the European Union, and it will have its own budget and its own centralized apparatus, not just the central bank, but actually tying all of the state budgets into a European budget, if you will. Interestingly enough, let me just read you a little portion of this. This financial minister of Germany is saying, a long-term advocate of treaty change sees reform establishing an institutional architecture for a common fiscal and economic policy throughout the EU. With a parliament, financial minister, and budget to support countries in crisis and encourage reform. He said it was nonsense to suggest that the power for a Eurozone commissioner to reject national budgets would impinge on sovereignty. Now, let me read that again. He said it was nonsense to suggest the power for a Eurozone commissioner to reject national budgets would impinge on sovereignty. He obviously doesn't understand the word like we understand the word sovereignty. Then he goes on to say, we have moved sovereignty to the European level, he says. So in other words, they're going to take the independence away from the states to decide their own budgets and move it into a European commissioner to decide yay or nay. It's the same as saying in the United States, we're not going to allow the state legislatures to have a budget unless it's approved by the federal government. Now, these are the individuals that are negotiators for the Transatlantic trade and and investment partnership want us to get in bed with. For instance, the U.S. official here who is negotiating for us is Michael Froman, and this is from Politico. And he says that the trade deal should be as strong as NATO, this TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. He says, we want the TTIP to build an economic and trade relationship that is as strong as the strongest military alliance in the world, but fundamentally it has to be driven by the underlying economics. Now, keep in mind what the Germans want. They want a yay or nay out of the federal government, so to speak, of the European Union over their budgets over every one of the countries, not just the individual counties or states within these countries, but the whole country itself, like all of Germany, all of France, etc. Now, if we get in bed with these people, will that also mean through one of these strongest treaties that we've ever put together, we would also have to submit our budget to the EU? I wonder. Not the first step, not probably in the second step, but the third or fourth or fifth, and we would be subject to what the European Union says our budget should be. Now, I suppose when our budget's so out of whack, what difference would it make? Except they would bleed us dry. That's literally what they would do. We're already financing them. They're using this Ukrainian deal to finance the Ukraine, but in regard to that, it isn't financing the Ukraine. That money, those 25 billion plus that we're set to send them through the IMF and other institutions, is actually going to go to the international bankers, because that's where the money belongs, and some of it to Russia itself, because they owe money to Russia. So, at any rate, now they're trying to say, well, you know, we need to wean Europe off of Russian oil and gas. Well, we can do that already. We don't need a trade deal to do that. I mean, it's simply a matter between the consumer and the supplier. We have ships that can ship them natural gas. We have ships that can ship them oil, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, the pipelines already are in existence out of Russia into Western Europe. What are they going to do? Just turn the spigot off? They'll be there for them, available for them at any time. But we don't need a trade deal to send them gas and oil. Put up the money, you've got it. Very simple. One of the things, too, that I found very disturbing this week was in USA Today in regard to the religious freedom issue before the Supreme Court right now with Hobby Lobby and others. And some of the statements by these people are awful. If these statements are quoted correctly, and they have quotes around them. So here's one from Supreme Court Justice Kagan. She says this, quote, "One religious group could opt out of this, and another religious group could opt out of that. And everything would be piecemeal." Yes, that's correct. It's called freedom, the freedom of choice. We have our faiths. We have certain beliefs within our faiths. Some of these beliefs are different from other faiths. We won't get into that. But we have the right to hold this faith, to hold these religious views, to operate as individuals or companies or anything else under the Constitution of the United States. These are God-given rights given to us. And if we want to be a little different here and a little bit different there, so what? It is no business of the federal government to make us all one size fits all. That's not the way this country was put together. It's a way of stifling this country if everybody fits into the same mold. Invention will disappear. Freedom will disappear. And we have individuals like Kagan on the Supreme Court that thinks freedom of religion, being able to opt out of this or that or the other, is too piecemeal. Well, I'm sorry. It's fraught with danger when you've got Supreme Court justices thinking like that. Another thing that's been going on, for instance, is in the Philippines. For years we knew that these so-called Muslim rebels were actually communists. Now we hide that. Now they're just strictly Muslim. There's a little history to this, but at any rate, they call it here Philippines Muslim rebels sign peace deal. Everywhere you go, whether it's the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or on the news or what have you, we get fed this idea that all these rebels are Muslim. Yes, many of them are Muslims, but they are obfuscating the fact that they're also communist, and where they get their money to be armed and trained and everything else. And by the way, all of these rebels are fully armed, uniforms, helmets, the whole 9 yards. Somebody's supplying those things to them. Somebody's putting up the money for it. And it's strange that all of these particular weapons seem to be stamped made in China or Russia. That's a clue as to what's really going on. Something else that is interesting that I saw on the internet this last week Won't tell you who it was, but there's a lot of propaganda out there right now trying to convince people that the move for a con or convention, a constitutional convention, is extremely successful. Just to give you an idea, let me just read you a couple of sentences. It says, "We're well on our way to reaching our goals for 2014. We've made some great progress and we're gaining momentum every day." Ladies and gentlemen, they've only got one state so far, and we've beaten them in all the others so far. I'm not saying we won't lose a few more, but as far as being on track, they're nowhere near on track, and they're doing everything they can to convince people that it's all over. We're going to have a constitutional convention. Don't fight it anymore. It's the wave of the future. Nothing could be further from the truth. We're beating them hands down because of a lot of good members and allies of the John Birch Society getting out in the halls of the state legislatures. We're beating them in the halls of the state legislatures. We're not beating them on the internet. We don't care about beating them on the internet. That's not where the votes are. The votes are in the state legislatures, and that's where we're winning. Until next week, we'll see you then.